I have to be TikTok?
Oh God, no. Can I have a TikTok but like not make videos and just watch other people's videos? Is that a thing?
Yeah, that's what most people do.
That's what most people do? Okay. There's a lot of content on TikTok, so somebody's making videos somewhere. Okay. Just know that if I have a TikTok, like I'm not dancing, we're not doing none of that stuff is happening. All right. So we're going to now shift the focus of what we're doing in class for almost the entirety of what's left. Okay. We've covered some stuff about some exercise phys. We've covered some level of kind of epidemiology of why physical activity is good for us, what physical activity is. We've talked about aerobic training and resistance training and kind of what the adaptations are and how much you need, et cetera, et cetera. So for the last part of class, we're going to go disease by disease through some of the most common chronic diseases that people have. And we're going to talk about the pathology of those diseases. So what's wrong with you? Okay. You have high blood pressure. Why? What is wrong with you? And then we're going to talk about the role of sort of physical activity or a lack of in causing the disease, but also then the role of increasing your physical activity as a possible way to treat the disease. Okay? So we're going to start with the most prevalent chronic disease in the entire world. Okay? And that is cardiovascular disease. Okay? That's cardiovascular disease. CVD is important because it's the leading cause of death in the US and worldwide. Okay? I don't know why that just did that, but about 4 out of every 10 deaths in the country is due to cardiovascular disease. Okay? So what I have done in previous classes is make a list. Write down the 10 people you care about most in life. 4 of them are going to die from cardiovascular disease. Okay? Make it make some sort of actual personal stakes and sense to you. So there are about 180 deaths per 100,000 people in the U.S. every year. That's how we're going to get this 40% from cardiovascular disease. So about 80 million people. We're a country of what, like 400 million or thereabouts, something like that. About 80 million people have some form of either diagnosed or undiagnosed cardiovascular disease. And so we'll talk a lot about kind of what the diagnosed versions look like. One of the big issues, though, is because of lack of understanding, because of lack of education, because of lack of access to health care, there's also a very significant, what? No! Okay.
That's why I said he was like, yeah, it's like.
What is going on? Okay, so Zoomers, this is going to end, and we're just going to have to start it over again. So I apologize. That's very strange. That's going to create making the video very, very problematic. It's going to be these little choppy, short videos. It's the undiagnosed disease that's also a really big issue. Because there's a bunch of people that have cardiovascular disease, and they just don't know it. Okay? They don't know it. Either because they don't know like what it is, like they may have symptoms, but they don't understand that that's part of cardiovascular disease, which may seem sort of out of left field for you guys. But there's lots of people that they don't know they have it because they can't afford to go to the doctor in the midst of this. So cardiovascular disease is going to include kind of a host of different kind of subcategories. Okay. And we're going to look at these based upon the kind of the percentages of overall cardiovascular disease deaths. So the biggest thing that leads to death is something called coronary heart disease or coronary artery disease. Coronary artery disease, and we'll go through kind of each of these things in kind of individually, but coronary arteries are the arteries that bring blood from the heart back to the heart. And so if you have a problem here, you cannot provide adequate blood flow to the heart. Without adequate blood flow to the heart, then cardiac tissue can die. If cardiac tissue dies, then the heart ceases to work and you can't circulate blood into your brain and your other tissues. Okay? So that's about 50% of cardiovascular disease deaths. About another 20% are from stroke, which we'll talk about, which is a lack of blood flow in areas in the brain. What we call hypertensive disease. So hypertension or high blood pressure is a form of cardiovascular disease. And what it tends to do is it exacerbates the other kinds of cardiovascular disease. Having hypertension increases your risk of having coronary artery disease. And if you have coronary artery disease, hypertension makes it worse. Hypertension tends to underlie most of the things when people have congestive heart failure and whatnot as well. So we'll kind of talk about the ins and outs out of all of this. In the US, there's about 1.1 million heart attacks per year, many of which are survived, but by the time you have a heart attack, you probably have fairly progressed along forms of cardiovascular disease. The heart attacks often lead to damage to the heart, which is then going to kind of feed back into and make any of these conditions worse and make you at an elevated risk of having another heart attack. So big deal. This is going to affect almost everybody or somebody that you care about at some point in your life. Okay? So we're going to focus on 4 primary kinds of cardiovascular disease. Coronary artery disease, or CAD, sometimes called just coronary heart disease or coronary vascular disease. It comes in a lot of different names, okay? We're going to talk about angina pectoris, and a myocardial infarction. This is really not a kind of disease. It's more of an outcome that is a result of these things, but it gets classified under that if you go to the American Heart Association. Stroke, and then high blood pressure, okay? So these are kind of the kinds and things that I want you guys, we're gonna go through and learn about the individual pathologies of each of these things. But the best place for us to start with cardiovascular disease is with something called atherosclerosis, okay? Atherosclerosis. So let's throw it out there. Lily, what do you think atherosclerosis is? Okay, a constriction in the arteries, okay? That's close. What you're calling is probably most technically referred to as stenosis, which is a narrowing, but most people that have stenosis, it's because of atherosclerosis. So what if you had an artery that had atherosclerosis in it, what's it going to look like? Plaque filled. What do those plaques look like, Zach? Sure, color. Yellow. What are they made up of, for the most part? Fatty deposits, okay? Atherosclerosis, and this is an interesting thing. This is probably the single biggest underlying pathology of every kind of cardiovascular disease, okay? You are going to have a deposition of these fatty plaques on the inside of arteries, okay? The inside of arteries. That's going to cause a host of problems. The first of which is that it narrows the space on the inside. It narrows the tube, basically, that are your arteries. And so it makes it, 1, more difficult for blood to get through them, and 2, it raises the pressure of the blood traveling, okay? Atherosclerosis is the primary underlying cause of high blood pressure, okay? The primary cause. Some people don't have atherosclerosis and they have high blood pressure, right? But for a lot of people, this is the primary cause of high blood pressure. The presence of these atherosclerotic plaques in your coronary arteries leading to this narrowing is the primary underlying pathophysiology, the primary problem of coronary artery disease. Zach?
Are you shocked that there's like nothing that you can order like consumer take to be able to somewhat like not rid of, but like I don't say burn off type of thing, but like burn off in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Turn it into like urea or whatever fluid you get out of your body or spike.
So I would take issue So once you have it, you probably can't take very many things to get rid of it. But there are things that you can do and things that you can take that can prevent its formation in the first place. And so we'll talk about some of those things once we figure out how these things end up forming here in the next couple of slides. So, I mean, if you want it to go away, you can go get, like, they have surgery where they go in and they like cut all of it out, basically. Like they have this thing that's like a roto-rooter, like it cleans out your toilet kind of thing, right? It goes, and it comes in there and it just sort of cuts some of that stuff out, basically, and it tries to open those spaces up. But I'm sure there's drug companies and supplement companies that are working on those kinds of things, but it probably illustrates just kind of how catastrophically bad this is, that once it's there, we can't do very much about it. Right? So, okay. So I do need you guys to understand these things that we're going to cover on this slide. The steps, or what we would call the etiology, that lead to the formation of these atherosclerotic plaques is really important, okay? Because it's going to illustrate the places where maybe physical activity, maybe a supplement, maybe a certain drug, okay, that people take, could potentially have some positive effects, because it's going to intervene at one of these particular steps and try to block the formation down here, okay? So in an ideal world, the best way to prevent all of this is to just never let them form. And so we've got to stop one of these steps in some way, shape, or form. Okay? So what ends up happening, atherosclerosis is the end product of an exaggerated injury response, okay, to a blood vessel. This is the kind of way off, overreacting endpoint of a tiny little nick or a tiny little injury on the inner lining of an artery. Okay? And so this is the place, and this is why, you know, these things happen naturally. All of you have some level of atherosclerosis in many of your high pressure arteries right now. We could look, hopefully not in my daughter, but we're probably not that far off, okay? You can start developing this at a very, very young age, but it may take 40, 50, 60, 70 years for it to get bad enough that it actually does this, okay? So I'm entering the phase of that basically some of my vessels may be lined in chicken fingers and Doritos.